Today we are presenting the case study, The Right to Fair and Healthy Housing, How CBOs are leading the fight for housing security in Fresno. My name is Guadalupe Corona, and I am a research assistant with Central Valley Health Policy Institute. I am accompanied today by my colleagues who will also be introducing themselves.
My name is Anna Rubio, and I am also a research assistant with Central Valley Health Policy Institute.
And my name is Armando Ramirez. I'm also research assistant at the Central Valley Health Policy Institute.
Thank you both so much. We will be presenting a case study about people power and power building around housing equity in Fresno, including increasing affordable housing and equitable housing policies. We will be discussing how the pandemic impacted Fresno BHC Coalition's housing work of the last decade and how advocates pivoted to meet community needs and help put in place housing policies and programs. Power building allowed the coalition to meet the moment and address ongoing eviction issues and emerging financial hardships that came about during the pandemic. Two programs that are highlighted today include the Eviction Protection Program, or EPP, and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP, which were the result of people working together to build power to move resources to where they are needed most. Next. I would like to start today's discussion with a little bit of background information on building healthy communities, which was a 10-year place-based initiative funded by the California Endowment to advance statewide policies that directly address health inequities at the community level. The Fresno BHC Place, which includes Central, Southeast, and Southwest Fresno, was one of 14 sites in California funded as part of the BHC initiative. The Fresno BHC has continues today as a 501c3 organization. Next. For more than a decade, the Fresno BHC has served as a convener of a coalition of community-based organizations and residents. And the Fresno BHC Coalition has addressed health equity at the community level through power building in Fresno around issues that affect residents most, including affordable housing and housing-related policies. By amplifying adult and youth residents' voices and working to increase their decision-making at public and private levels. Next. Thank you. During the last 10 years, the Fresno BHC Coalition partners have focused on a number of housing issues. Since 2013, the coalition's advocacy around housing policy has led to important housing wins. And here on this slide, we have highlighted 4 important ones, which include the Blighted Vacant Building Ordinance, which outline responsibilities for property owners of vacant housing and requires property owners to bring blighted properties up to code. Next, we have the development of the Vacant Blighted Property Registry, which mandates that property owners register with the city to create a tracking system for vacant and blighted properties. Following, we have the Rental Inspection Program, which allowed for more regular interior inspections and code enforcement action on all rental properties. With the Rental Inspection Request Program, residents could file complaints about rental housing conditions with the city tax force. Next. The culmination of more than a decade of housing advocacy provided the necessary experience to prevent housing displacement during the pandemic in 2 important ways. The Eviction Protection Program, which ensures legal support for residents facing eviction, and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which aligns a portion of pandemic-related funding into a rental assistance program for residents and property owners. These are the 2, here on the slide, these are the 2 programs we will be focusing on today. Next. We have prepared a glossary with terms important for today's discussion. And this includes starting off with the first term that is important for today's discussion includes the unlawful detainer. which is, according to the Superior Court of Fresno, an unlawful detainer lawsuit is a suit brought by a landlord to obtain possession of the rented property and receive payment of back rent. In order to legally evict a tenant, remove and lock the tenant out of the property, the landlord must file an unlawful detainer lawsuit. Next, we have the right to counsel, which is a program that would provide access to legal representation for all residents facing eviction. Next, we have the two terms the two programs we'll be focusing on. EPP, which briefly I'll reiterate for you guys. The definition is a fund that secured legal representation for residents facing evictions where an unlawful detainer has been filed with the courts. And lastly, we have ERAP, which provides renters and property owners access to funding support for rental assistance. I want to also reiterate the distinction between the right to counsel and the eviction protection program. The eviction protection program is the established program where assistance in the form of legal representation is not available to everyone and is available only until funds run out. Whereas the right to counsel would be available to all, where everyone would have access to legal representation and eviction proceedings. It is grounded in community input and aligns with community determined needs. Next. Next, we will now be talking about the first housing policy, which is the eviction protection program.
When talking about evictions, local research has demonstrated that they are a growing problem. Our case study identified two primary eviction issues where advocates and residents rallied to take action. The first one being the lack of knowledge that tenants faced regarding rights and access to legal resources. A recurring issue around evictions seemed to be centered within the process itself because residents did not have a clear understanding about what their rights were when served an eviction notice, or even the ability to understand when landlords failed to follow the proper eviction protocols. Unfortunately, many of the resources that do exist are often monolingual, which presented language barriers. In addition, tenants reported facing retaliatory evictions for requesting necessary unit repairs or reporting ordinance violations. Undocumented residents had a difficult time trusting the city attorney's office due to landlords' threats involving ICE. These factors played into giving landlords leverage during eviction proceedings, as many of them are usually represented by counsel who specialize in evictions. Next, please. There were several things that advocates pushed for in order to help tenants feel more protected, while also ensuring that the necessary resources would be made available. Advocates wanted a universal right to counsel program that would ensure representation to residents facing eviction by way of an unlawful detainer. They also wanted resources to be made available to tenants prior to the UD process in order to protect their housing due to tight timelines with the courts once the process got started. In an effort to provide residents with proper representation and resources, advocates worked toward and were able to establish a program that would help them when facing eviction. The city council members allocated funds to establish the eviction protection program, which provides funding for local attorneys to consult with, as well as represent residents facing a UD. Though progress is made with the implementation of the EPP, the program has some issues that advocates want to address, including its budget cap and who represents the tenants facing eviction. Next, please. Despite the implementation of the eviction protection program, which was established to aid tenants experiencing an unlawful detainer, advocates explained that it wasn't perfect and had more room to improve. Advocates pushed for the current EPP program to become a universal right to counsel, meaning that it would provide legal representation for all residents facing eviction. This would be a major change from the current funding structure that is in place, which has a predetermined budget cap and ultimately limits how many residents can access the program. Another improvement that would come with the implementation of a right to counsel program would be allowing residents to have a choice in their representation when facing evictions. Next, please. I want to take the time to present something that Dr. Nkosi mentioned during the interview when talking about the hardships that tenants face during the eviction process. She stated, "There is a power dynamic between the landlord and tenant. The tenant, now who must go to the city to get their side of the story heard, and there is a lot of mistrust and apprehension, since most marginalized people are undocumented."
So now I'll be talking about ERAP. In response to the pandemic, there was another housing program being developed to help renters and landlords make payments on time. We will be talking about the Emergency Rental Assistance Program and how CBOs move public funds to support the local community and their needs. At the time, cities were getting close to $100 million. Working with folks, we were asked, what are the priorities? In the beginning, the city had received a large amount of funding to help communities deal with the pandemic. Residents began to voice their concerns to advocates to get an idea of what the city would prioritize, and if the city would mismanage the millions of state and federal funding meant for communities in need. Advocates began to work out a plan of action to address the inequities being magnified by COVID-19. One way they found was to try to leverage the pandemic funding to make sure it would go support renters and homeowners. As the pandemic continued, subsequent stay-at-home orders hurt families and small landlords. Even households with moderate income were feeling the effects. Renters and homeowners struggled to meet rent and mortgage payments. Residents mentioned that they would go to work sick, as oftentimes they had little choice. With the lack of support, these factors wrecked local communities. Community leaders knew it was important to quickly work with the city to advocate for renters and homeowners to access the pandemic-related state and federal funding the city had received. While working with residents, they began to set community-based priorities through monthly meetings. Then advocates and residents wrote a formal letter to city leadership to outline necessary financial assistance and attended public comment sessions to speak directly with the city council. Previous advocacy and organizing work meant that there was already existing relationships with elected leaders, including the city council. Broadly, the city council and city officials agreed that rental assistance was an important issue. And in the meantime, advocates continued to follow up, working with residents and tracking the budgeting process to ensure alignment with resident priorities and also address accessibility issues. These efforts would become known as the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. ERAP was established by the city along with 6 CBOs. The partnership worked to allocate state and federal funding to provide relief to renters and landlords impacted by the pandemic. $54 million was provided for emergency rental assistance to improve housing stability in Fresno, and qualifying rents and landlords were eligible for payments or reimbursements regarding rent and utilities. Despite the significance of the program, it had run into some issues. It being a new program, its administration was developed quickly and could be confusing to navigate for both CBO staff and residents. It was a brand new program which neither the city nor CBOs had the infrastructure or time to ensure a smooth implementation. Advocates also noted that there was a lack of cultural humility. The required program documents could be complicated for residents to obtain, particularly in the case of tax information or residents who couldn't access bank statements online. Overall, there were also program barriers regarding online applications, as not everyone had access to the internet. This meant that many residents struggled to complete the application process, and it left CBOs trying to bridge the gaps in access. And lastly, the application approval process also took time, approximately 2 to 3 months, and it often put residents applying for assistance in a position where they could not access rental assistance quickly enough. This meant that they could end up months behind rental payments before their application was even processed. Advocates also note that immigrant communities were less likely to apply for assistance for government agencies. Advocates stated that by analyzing which city districts were applying for ERAP, it became clear that national anti-immigration narratives played a role. Often, these were the communities that needed assistance the most, but were least likely to apply for it. Even though ERAP was not perfect, the program was a noteworthy step for advocates to align public funds for communities that were often excluded from safety net programs. Currently, this program is closed as all funding has been spent, but advocates are adamant that ERAP should be a permanent program as economic and housing insecurity continue post-pandemic. Grecia Lenis, one of the community leaders, stated that many people will continue to struggle. It takes very little for someone to be financially ruined, whether it be a medical bill or job loss. Advocates also agree that it should be extended to homeowners struggling with mortgages to prevent foreclosure, and they will continue to fight for a comprehensive program that fills in the gaps for housing affordability and security. These two programs were created to fight predatory landlords and protect renters. The first was the Eviction Protection Program. City leadership had little oversight over the eviction process, often giving landlords the upper hand in eviction proceedings. Through their work, advocates provided some relief through the Eviction Protection Program, which provided a fund to represent tenants facing an unlawful detainer. Work continues to see a universal right to counsel. The other program was the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. The pandemic had affected people's ability to pay rent and mortgage payments. Through the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the city, alongside community-based organizations, set aside $54 million for rent and utility relief. These programs continue to build on the previous work of the last decade to improve housing security in Fresno. These efforts garnered significant media attention and raising public awareness. It brought additional residents into the conversation about housing rights, and they began participating in local and state efforts to develop housing solutions. Advocates believe that residents should continue to have the option of joining public meetings virtually to increase community input and participation. Currently, residents can view the meetings live through a broadcasting system and leave electronic comments through the city's website. As advocates continue to push for more permanent solutions to housing insecurity, Fresno has made steps to improve housing stability. Currently, they are working on implementing down payment grants with new funding from the state. And also in North Fresno, 60 units of affordable housing will be built to deal with the housing crisis locally. However, advocates know that more action is needed, and they will continue to fight for more permanent solutions to increase home ownership through financial education classes, down payment and closing cost assistance programs, expanding affordable housing options, and guidance on the home buying process. The pandemic highlighted the housing insecurities that Fresno renters have faced, both in facing the uncertainty of being without shelter and the hard toll it puts on them to risk losing their homes. The Fresno BHC Coalition has made progress in securing housing support for residents before and during the pandemic. Advocates note that these two successes, the EPP and ERAP, will continue to work towards completely changing the lives of renters and homeowners in Fresno. And we would like to thank everyone who attended this presentation on the right to fair and healthy housing, how CBOs are leading the fight for housing security in Fresno. And again, we would like to thank all our key informants who provided us with the data for this case study. And we also appreciate our funders who made this work possible. Thank you.